Thanks, Joe. And I want to just say again, thanks. I'm going to take that over. I just want to say thanks again to Joe. And I was feeling real thankful when my wife and I went out on a date last night, and we dropped off our kids, and they were here on the mission trip. And that wasn't always the way. I'm just really glad that we've got somebody like Joe here, and Lee, who's here as an intern, and all of our parent volunteers, and enough youth as we have, and all the excitement we have around youth to pull something like that off.
I counted 12 youth. They were moving around a lot. I think there were 12.
So we've got a big event next week, and a retreat, and a lot of things happening. And so the youth is a really great small group ministry in the life of our church right now. Gosh, I guess we turn this off. The lesson is, well, what did we just do here? Did we lose a slide? Did we lose a slide here? Oh, we lost a slide. Well, how'd that happen? Okay. Well, we'll just have to read I had the scripture on a slide, and that's, I don't know how that happened. Well, you're going to see all my slides, but we'll just have to read this from 2 Corinthians 4, chapter 3 through 6. So if I can find it on that slide, I will. I think I'll just have to keep this Bible open so we can refer back to it, because we're going to walk through this lesson, 2 Corinthians in chapter 4, verses 3 through 6. Follow along with me in your pew Bibles. It's here on page 180 of your pew Bibles, the lesson, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning in verse 3. It says, "And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of glory to Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." So this is the word of the Lord about the light of the gospel. The light of the gospel is being something different than what the God of the world tells us about ourselves. And I'm reminded of a story as we start. There was a man who, he was worried, he was concerned about his wife, and he went to the doctor, and he said to the doctor, "I'm concerned that my wife is losing her hearing." And the doctor said, "Well, here's an idea." He said, "Why don't we test and we just see how profound this is?" And so he said, "You go back home, and tonight I want you to follow in this regimen." He says, "I want you to get back from her about 15 feet, and I want you to ask her a question, and then see if she responds. And if she doesn't respond, I need you to move in 5-foot increments towards her to see. That way we're going to test and see, how much hearing loss she has." And so he comes up behind her in the kitchen, and there she is. She's chopping vegetables on the island there. He comes up behind her about 15 feet, and he says, "Honey, what's for dinner?" But he doesn't hear her respond. So he goes forward about 5 feet, and he says again, "Honey, what's for dinner?" And again, she doesn't respond. So he goes forward another 5 feet. He's just standing 5 feet from her, and he says, "Honey, what's for dinner?" And again, he doesn't hear a response. So this time he's kind of ticked off, and he goes up right behind her, and he says real loud in his ear, "Honey, I said, what's for dinner?" And she said, "For the 4th time, I told you it's vegetable soup." But the point, right, of that story, the point is when we ourselves cannot hear, then it's difficult for us to determine. It's difficult for us to realize. Oftentimes we'll look out in the world and we'll think, "Oh, they can't hear," right? When it's really we ourselves who can't hear it. How do you get out of that? It's a conundrum, isn't it? And it's frankly, it's something similar to what we all deal with. I think it's an analogy for a lot of different things. And in fact, I'll just tell on myself that I have a problem. Right? I have a problem, and that's when I get anxious, when I get under stress, then I tend to find fault with others more readily than I would first. I tend to get irritated with other people, with my circumstances. I tend to point a finger of blame
And the problem is that I can get into that. I can get into that as a cycle, almost kind of like a headspace. And once you get into that cycle, it's very, very difficult to get out. Because then I'll find circumstances are more and more irritating. People are more and more irritating to me. I get more and more irritated. I get more and more inside my head. See, that's the very point. It's very difficult, and really you need something from outside of yourself to pull yourself out of that when you get into that kind of a headspace. That's why I say so often, thank God for my wife, I tell you what, because she will often, almost inevitably, she will tell me, she'll give me a different perspective. And aren't we richly blessed to have our spouses, amen? To have our friends, to have our friends who are going to be honest with us, who aren't just going to co-sign on the stories that we tell ourselves. Aren't we blessed to have our church family, people who will shoot straight with us, who will give us another perspective? Because I think that's what this is all about. It's like, because we will deceive ourselves. It's like the lesson, I wish I had it up in front of us. I said I would keep it open. I've got it here written on a piece of paper. But it says, if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In this case, the god of the world, who is the devil, right? Who is whatever is the power in the world that is against us, which is, trying to get us to destroy ourselves. It says the god of the world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel. So there's two ways. You can either see things in the way of the world, or you can see things in the way that God sees these things. Right? And then the problem is we can get caught up inside ourselves, and it's very difficult. We have to expose ourselves to influences from outside of ourselves in order that we can see from God's perspective and not from our own perspective. So again, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. Now we can look out in the world, right, and we can say, well, we see out there, we see evidence of this out in the world. We can look out in the world and we can see people that are walking in darkness. In fact, I remember Clyde Baldridge. You know how close I was. Some of you remember Clyde Baldridge. Some of you remember, and he passed with pancreatic cancer inside of 2 months, and we were just very close. And so I spent a lot of time with him in those last days. And he would say to me in those last days, he would say, because he would look out in the world, and he realized how close he was to his heavenly home. And he would say, what's wrong with people? They can't see the truth. He says their ears must be stopped up. Their eyes must be blind. Right? And indeed, there's a prophecy. It says in Isaiah that the eyes of the blind will be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. In fact, that's why Jesus came, remember, to make the blind see and to make the deaf hear. So we can look out into the world and we can say, yeah, this is true. But you know what? It's too easy, isn't it, to look out and say this is true of them. And not to realize that it's also true of us too. Amen? Because that's true. I'm a baptized Christian. I'm a Christian pastor. And I can still roll up out of my bed and get out on the wrong side of my bed in the morning, right? And I can be occupied with thoughts, not of God, not of the gospel, of the light of Jesus Christ, but of the thoughts of the God of this world. So it's a conundrum. How do you shift? You get into that headspace, right? Again, I like this, because we can talk about how this applies to people out there, but let's talk about how this applies to people like us. We can get into that headspace, that infinite loop. You'll talk about it. I'll talk about my head, like you say, the hamster wheel, it's like an infinite loop. It's like this obsessive spinning around, or, I like it saying, here's a saying, maybe you all haven't heard it, I don't ever go in there without a flashlight and a shotgun. Right? That points to the darkness that we have up here. And you can get into that space of darkness, that infinite loop. And how do you get out of it? When I'm in that headspace again, we're stuck. How do you get out of it without some kind of a lifeline of something that is outside yourself? It's a conundrum. Well, y'all saw a little bit of my slide this morning. It is probably not appropriate for worship, but I'm going to do it anyway. And this is because it's the comedian. He's kind of a potty mouth comedian. He's an English comedian. His name is Russell Brand. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? This English guy with long hair. Well, he just did a book that he calls Recovery, just in 2017, and it was really neat because he takes the 12-step and he changes them into his own language. Again, kind of a potty mouth, but I'm going to try to make this palatable, acceptable to a worship space. So see what this is about. This is what he says.
Well, there's my picture. What are you talking about? Okay, this is what, okay, he says, step one. He's explaining this conundrum, right? He says, step one, are you screwed up? We'll pretend that's what it says. Are you screwed up? Step two, imagine, could you not be screwed up? And then step three, are you on your own going to unscrew yourself? You see, that's the conundrum, isn't it? When you're in that space, how do you get out of that space? When you're blaming everybody but yourself, how do you realize and turn and see, maybe I got to start with myself? How can you unscrew yourself? You need something from outside. You need some kind of a lifeline. Not all of you are lucky to have a wife like mine who's always going to, point the finger. Right? I mean, it's something like it. It reminds me of what Paul also said in Romans 7. Remember this? This was the passage that brought me to faith, where he says, I do not understand my own actions as an adult. Because I grew up as a child with my parents. But when I came into my adult faith, it was around this question. I was stuck. How do I get out? Remember this passage? All right, let's read it together. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. So I find it to be a law, that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. You see, it's that same dilemma. It's that same dilemma that Russell Brand describes when he's talking about those steps. Who will, when I'm in this space, how am I going to get out? It needs to be something from outside of myself. And that's why we say in the serenity prayer, right? We say, God grant me the serenity. God grant me the serenity. I mean, in all of our prayers, when we turn to God and we're inviting God to step in, God's got to come in. Something from outside of us has to come in and give us that lifeline. God grant it to me. Because I can't do it for myself. Right? And so this is the problem. Every single day, for me, this is just my own experience. I don't know about you, but I've got to get up out of the bed and I've got to focus my mind on the things of God and not the things of this world. Because that's the question. Do I have the perspective of the God of this world, or do I have the perspective of the God that I know in Jesus Christ? That's what shines the light in the darkness. Right? I mean, I have to take my shotgun in there, if I've got that light. Right? But this is, how do you do it? How do you do it? And we've got to reach out. We've got to reach to something beyond ourselves. And as I said, I've got to do it, though, because I'm not going to find that perspective on my own. I've got to find outside influence to give me that perspective. And I mentioned my wife. Right? I'm thinking on my wife, because she gives me this constant outside perspective. I think God brought us to each other so we can do that for each other. But everybody doesn't have that. Here's Jan. Bill's been gone for a while. So what do we have? We've got our community of friends here in the life of the church. And we've got people that are close to us who will shoot straight with us, right? Or we've got the church. I come to church 3 times a week, right? We got 2 services on Sunday. We got service on Wednesday night. I've got Bible study. We've got Sunday school here in a little bit. Plus, I get all kinds. I have a practice of meditation in the morning, practice of prayer and meditation to focus my mind on these things. And I'll recognize when I get all squirrely, for me it's a flag when I start finding calm. So then I often have to double down on that practice. What's also a really great thing for me, I've told you how the songs of our faith. But sometimes I'll be blessed, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll get a song in my head. And sometimes God will give me a song, I can chew on that song all the day long. It gives me something else that I can think about, right? Sometimes when I'm facing a trial, and I'm tempted to do the right thing, what's interesting to me, God will put a song in my head. And it'll remind me, it'll give me something else to think about. That's why I love this. I love this lesson too, right from Ephesians, where it says, be filled with the Spirit as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, singing and making melody to yourselves in your hearts, giving thanks to God at all times.
right? That's what that song is for. To fill our hearts, to fill our heads, to push out all that rotten stuff so we can fill our heads and fill our hearts with the things of God. And so sometimes I'll even get a song. I've got some songs, a classical music song or a gospel song, and I've got them on my phone, and I'll plug it up. Sometimes I'll listen to the same one. I'll listen to the same song over and over and over again because I just want to push that message into my head. Most recently, it's been a song, like I even played it on Wednesday night. I'll probably play it again. This is a song. My favorite genre is gospel music. Listen to the message of this song right here. I won't play it for you. I love this song. It's called Grace by Charles Jenkins and Fellowship Chicago. It's a black gospel style. My testimony is real. I came this far by faith. My road ain't always been smooth, but I don't look like what I've been through. Truth is, I'm kept, blessed by the best, and one word describes the rest. Everybody say grace. Isn't that a good song? I mean, that's just one mention. You have your own favorite songs, but that's a mention. That's how I can right-size myself. Right? That's how I can see myself, not as the world sees me, but as God sees me, in the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because it's all about grace. None of us stands any taller one than the other. We've got to remember that. We've got to get that message. That message has got to come in from the outside, because in my experience, it's not something that I just conjured up for myself. So, and one last thing, I'll just finish out. One last story. I'll tell you because that story's not finished. I told you that story to start about the guy who ends up. He turns out he's the one who's got a hearing problem, and so he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor fits him with these fancy new. He said, "I'm not going to spare no expense," And so he fits him with these fancy new hearing aids that you can't even see. And he sends him back home, and then about a month later, he comes back, and the doctor says, "Well, what's your family think about you're being able to hear now and your new hearing aids?" He says, "Well, I haven't told my family." He says, "No," he says, "I just sit back and listen to their conversations. I've changed my will 3 times." But you see, the point is that if we've got it, if we get our ears unstopped, amen, then do we not have a responsibility to tell other people about it? Do we not have a responsibility to share the good news with other people? Other people who may be walking around with their eyes blind and with their ears stopped. And because that's the paradox of it, isn't it? If I want to hold on to this for myself, then I've got to give it away. I've got to carry that message. I've got to get it to other people. I'm reminded, I work with a lot of guys struggling with addiction and such, and I had a guy like this call me up the other day, and he was just despairing. And I said to him, I just said something, just the first thing that popped into my head. I said, it sure is better to be pushing the grass down than pushing the grass up. Right? Or I said to him, I remember what I said, you got 2 good eyes, you got 2 good legs, you got 2 good hands. I just said these things. These are the things that just popped into my mind. And what he said to me? He said he was despairing, and he said to me, you're right. I do have 2 good hands, and it's a miracle. I haven't hurt myself. I've still had all these things. It changed his attitude. It helped to change his perspective. And then I felt good because somebody called me up looking for that word of encouragement. You see how by giving that message to somebody else, I was able to buoy myself up. That's the way that this works. In this spiritual practice, that we've got to carry this message to others if we want to keep it for ourselves. This is how we let the light shine in the darkness. This is how we gain the perspective of God. Let it be so also with us. Thanks be to God this day.